Nestled in the rural hills of western Pennsylvania lies a collection of church relics that historians cannot properly trace, a mystery that has endured for centuries. From Philadelphia to the frontier settlements, across 17 different congregations, small bone fragments and pieces of preserved flesh rest within ornate reliquaries. Their true origins have been obscured by the passage of time and, more deliberately, by a web of calculated deception. The historical record reveals a chilling pattern. Between 1745 and 1792, over 73 individuals vanished from these devout communities. They were devout men, women, and, most disturbingly, orphaned children, all later declared saints by local religious leaders. What remains largely unknown is that a sealed record, held within the Philadelphia Historical Society, contains the testimonies of 3 witnesses who stumbled upon the horrifying truth. This manuscript points to the Whitmore family workshop, a place where human bodies were processed into holy relics for nearly 5 decades. 4 centuries, this document has remained sealed at the request of the very churches involved. But through meticulous research, I have uncovered the terrifying reality that the religious establishment has desperately tried to keep buried. Before we delve deeper into the story of the Whitmore family's gruesome enterprise, hit that subscribe button if you're brave enough to hear the historical horrors that few channels dare to reveal. Let me know in the comments what state you're listening from. Perhaps your own local church holds secrets you never could have imagined. Now, let us journey deeper into this disturbing chapter of American religious history. The true horror of what transpired in those Pennsylvania woods extends far beyond what most historians are willing to acknowledge, its dark legacy affecting communities whose descendants still worship in those same churches to this very day. In the mid-18th century, the colony of Pennsylvania existed as a unique religious haven. While the Quakers dominated Philadelphia and its surrounding counties with their plain meeting houses and emphasis on inner light, the Western Territories were a blend of Protestant denominations, Presbyterian, Lutheran, and smaller Christian sects. Each of these groups established modest wooden churches as they pushed further into frontier lands, territories claimed from native peoples. It was into this landscape that the Whitmore family arrived from England in 1742, settling in Chester County, approximately 30 miles west of Philadelphia, where the rolling hills gave way to dense, shadowy forests and scattered farmsteads. Nathaniel Whitmore, a stern-faced man whose penetrating grey eyes and trimmed beard framed an angular jawline, presented himself as a skilled craftsman of religious items. His chalices, communion plates, and ornate Bible covers quickly gained favor among the wealthier, more established congregations. His workshop was a 2-story timber structure situated on 12 wooded acres, its large windows flooding the main floor with natural light. Here, he would receive ministers and church elders who commissioned his increasingly sought-after work. His wife, Elizabeth, a slender woman with delicate hands and an unnerving ability to maintain a placid expression regardless of circumstances, managed their household and 4 children with a precision that neighbors found admirable, if somewhat cold and detached. The Whitmores attended Sunday services at the Harmony Meeting House, a modest Quaker gathering, where they sat in quiet reverence, occasionally offering measured testimonies that impressed the congregation with their apparent spiritual depth. Their eldest son, Thomas, assisted his father in the workshop, while the daughters, Mary and Sarah, helped their mother with the household duties. The youngest, William, was a frail boy with an unsettling intensity in his gaze. He often spent hours alone in the woods, returning with plants and small animal specimens that he would meticulously preserve in his room, a hobby his parents encouraged as a scientific pursuit. Life in Chester County during those years was marked by the typical challenges of colonial existence: harsh winters, occasional crop failures, and the constant, low-grade tension of frontier life. Yet it was also a time of intense religious fervor and economic growth. The Great Awakening had swept through the colonies in the 1730s and 1740s, leaving in its wake a heightened spiritual awareness and a fierce competition between denominations for souls and social status. Churches sought to distinguish themselves not only through doctrine but through the quality and grandeur of their buildings and religious artifacts. The Whitmores seemed perfectly positioned to serve this burgeoning market. Nathaniel's superior craftsmanship elevated him above local competitors, and by 1745, his workshop had expanded to include 2 apprentices, Jacob Miller, the orphaned son of German immigrants, and Peter Collins, a quiet young man from a poor Philadelphia family. The family lived comfortably, though not ostentatiously, cultivating a reputation for industriousness and piety that served as the perfect mask for what occurred behind the workshop's closed doors after sunset. The beginning of their macabre enterprise can be traced to the late autumn of 1745, when Mary Collins, a devout Quaker woman known for her healing work among the poor, disappeared while traveling home from visiting a sick family on the outskirts of the county. Her vanishing caused brief concern, but as was often the case in colonial times, it was eventually attributed to an Indian attack or a wild animal encounter. What no one could have known then was that Mary Collins represented the first victim in a horrifying enterprise that would continue, completely undetected, for nearly half a century. On November 17, 1745, as an early winter storm descended upon Chester County, Mary Collins made her final journey along the rutted path that led past the Whitmore property. The sky had darkened prematurely, heavy clouds promising snow as the wind drove brittle leaves across the frozen ground. Mary, a widow of 43 years with grey-streaked hair and hands weathered from decades of charitable work, pulled her woolen cloak tighter, quickening her pace as she passed the lantern light glowing from the Whitmore workshop. According to Thomas Whitmore's confession, written years later from his deathbed and discovered hidden in the wall of a Philadelphia prison cell, his father had been watching Mary Collins for weeks. Father said her reputation for saintliness would make her perfect, Thomas wrote in a shaky script. He told us God had revealed to him a great purpose, a way to bring true holiness to the colonies through sacred vessels. As Mary passed the property, Nathaniel emerged from the trees, lantern in hand, his voice tinged with practiced desperation as he called for assistance. He claimed his son William had wandered into the woods and failed to return. Mary, known for her boundless kindness, did not hesitate to offer her help despite the approaching storm. She followed Nathaniel deeper into the property, away from the road, and toward a small clearing where the workshop's rear entrance stood, partially concealed by a stand of pine trees. I watched from the window as Father led her inside. Thomas's confession continued. Mother had prepared the back room with canvas cloths covering the floor. I didn't understand yet what they intended. I was 16 and believed when they spoke of creating sacred relics, they meant crafting representations, not the handwriting here became illegible, as if the writer's hand had trembled too violently to form coherent letters. What happened in that back room remained mercifully undetailed in Thomas's account, but the aftermath was described with disturbing precision. Mary Collins's body was methodically processed over the following 3 days. Nathaniel, who had studied preservation techniques from medical texts brought from England, taught his eldest son how to treat human tissue with a mixture of salt, herbs, and other substances to prevent decay. Elizabeth Whitmore sewed small pouches of varying sizes from black velvet, each embroidered with golden religious symbols. Father said we were doing God's work, Thomas wrote. He said the Protestant churches of America lacked the sacred relics that gave the Catholic Church its power and that we would provide what was needed to elevate true worship in the colonies. I believed him then. God forgive me. I believed him. Just 2 weeks after Mary Collins's disappearance, Nathaniel Whitmore traveled to Philadelphia carrying several ornate wooden boxes of his own crafting. He returned with more commissions than ever before and a considerable sum of money. At the next Quaker meeting, he spoke movingly about the loss of our dear friend Mary and suggested a special memorial service be held. During this service, he presented the meeting house with an exquisitely crafted altar box, explaining he had made it in Mary's honor. What the congregation did not know was that sealed within a hidden compartment of that box was a small piece of Mary Collins herself, the first of what would become hundreds of sacred relics distributed throughout the colonies over the following decades. The winter of 1745 passed into spring, and with the thaw came rumors from Philadelphia, whispers of miraculous healings attributed to a holy relic held by a small Episcopal church in the city. The rector there claimed that a fragment of bone from an unknown saint had cured 3 parishioners of their ailments. The bone, he said, had been acquired from a European dealer through a local craftsman. That craftsman was Nathaniel Whitmore. By 1750, the Whitmore family's business had expanded considerably. Their workshop had doubled in size, now employing 5 apprentices who crafted the visible products, the ornate boxes, chalices, and religious items that served as the family's public face. None of these young men were permitted access to the cellar rooms beneath the workshop, where the true business of the Whitmores took place. The family had also constructed a new home, a substantial two-story structure of stone and timber that stood as a testament to their growing, and secretly blood-soaked, wealth. The disappearance of Mary Collins had long faded from local memory, replaced by occasional reports of other missing persons, a visiting preacher here, a devout elderly woman there. Typically, they were individuals without strong family connections, whose absences could be explained away by the dangers of colonial travel or the ever-convenient Indian troubles along the frontier. What evolved during this period was the Whitmores' method of selecting their victims. Mother developed what she called the discernment. Sarah Whitmore wrote in a journal discovered in 1823 during the demolition of the family's abandoned home. She could identify those whose bodies would produce the most powerful relics. She claimed God spoke to her, revealing which souls were destined for sainthood after death. This chilling rationalization allowed the family to see their actions not as murder, but as a divine calling. They were merely helping these chosen individuals achieve their heavenly purpose earlier than nature intended. The Whitmores had also refined their approach to creating and distributing the relics. Nathaniel established connections with church leaders throughout Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and as far south as Virginia. These relationships were carefully cultivated through donations, exceptional craftsmanship, and the strategic sharing of confidential information about European religious artifacts supposedly becoming available through his overseas connections. Father told them that the Catholic Church in Europe had hoarded sacred power for centuries, Thomas's confession explained. He convinced these Protestant ministers that acquiring relics quietly, discreetly, would bring the same power to their congregations without embracing Catholic doctrine. His arguments were especially effective with ambitious church leaders seeking to grow their flocks. The family's operation expanded to include a network of collaborators, mostly unwitting, who would report back on the miracles occurring in churches possessing Whitmore-provided relics. These accounts would then be shared with other potential buyers, creating a demand that commanded increasingly higher prices. Nathaniel instructed church leaders to keep the relics' existence secret from the general congregation, presenting them as a sacred trust known only to church elders, a strategy that limited exposure while enhancing the perceived value of these objects. What none of their customers knew was that the ancient European saints' relics they purchased at such dear cost were, in fact, created in the Whitmore cellar from the bodies of their own neighbors and countrymen. In the spring of 1753, a physician from Lancaster named Dr. Samuel Winters began asking uncomfortable questions after examining a healing relic at the request of a patient who claimed to have been cured by touching it. His careful inspection revealed that the preserved tissue could not possibly be as old as claimed, and the preservation methods appeared inconsistent with European techniques. Before he could pursue his investigation further, Dr. Winters disappeared while traveling between Lancaster and Philadelphia. His body was never found, but a small wooden case containing what was claimed to be the fingerbone of a 12th-century healer appeared in a Presbyterian church in New York the following month. The years passed, and the pattern continued. The Whitmore children grew into the family business with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Thomas, the eldest, became his father's primary assistant, while William, the youngest and most disturbing of the siblings, developed a particular talent for the preservation process, experimenting with techniques that allowed for the creation of more convincing relics. The daughters, Mary and Sarah, managed the financial aspects and correspondence, maintaining the family's respectable facade while laundering the considerable profits through legitimate business ventures. As the American colonies moved toward revolution, the political upheaval created new opportunities for the Whitmores. The disruption of trade with England created a shortage of religious items, positioning their workshop as one of the few reliable sources for churches throughout the colonies. The family was careful to demonstrate appropriate patriotic sentiment without becoming too closely identified with either side, a neutrality that allowed them to continue their gruesome trade regardless of which faction controlled their territory. As the Revolutionary War approached its conclusion, a disturbing new chapter in the Whitmore family business began, one that would eventually lead to their downfall. The year was 1781. And while the colonies celebrated their impending independence, the Whitmores identified a new and particularly profitable market for their gruesome products. The end of the Revolutionary War brought significant changes to the religious landscape of the newly formed United States. Churches damaged during the conflict required rebuilding, and a spiritual revival swept through communities seeking meaning after years of bloodshed. This environment created unprecedented demand for religious artifacts, and the Whitmores recognized an opportunity to expand their Macabre enterprise. In February of 1782, the first orphaned child disappeared from a church-run asylum in Philadelphia. 10-year-old Joseph Miller had been placed in the care of the Episcopal Church after losing his parents to smallpox the previous winter. Small for his age, with solemn eyes and a reputation for unusual piety, Joseph often led the other children in prayer and was favored by the clergy. His disappearance was noted, investigated briefly, and ultimately attributed to running away, a common occurrence in such institutions. 3 months later, the Church of St. Michael in eastern Pennsylvania reported a series of miraculous events surrounding a newly acquired relic, supposedly the preserved heart of a child martyr from the early church. Parishioners claimed that prayers offered before this relic resulted in extraordinary answers, particularly those concerning children's illnesses. The church's attendance swelled, and donations increased dramatically. Word of these miracles spread, creating demand among other churches for similar powerful relics. William suggested the children. Sarah Whitmore's journal revealed in a passage written in a shaky hand, the ink blotched as if by fallen tears. He said their innocence made them more powerful vessels for divine work. Father hesitated at first, but the profit potential convinced him. God help me. I knew it was wrong. Yet I said nothing. What followed was perhaps the most disturbing phase of the Whitmores' operation. Between 1782 and 1785, at least 16 children, all orphans or from destitute families, vanished from communities within a day's ride of the Whitmore property. Each disappearance created a brief stir before being attributed to the usual suspects: wilderness dangers, child traffickers, or simply the harsh realities of life for unprotected minors in the early Republic. During this same period, the market for child saint relics flourished among certain churches. These items commanded prices 5 times higher than adult relics, justified by their supposed spiritual potency and rarity. The Whitmores grew wealthier than ever, investing their blood money in land, businesses, and political connections that further insulated them from suspicion. However, the increased scale of their operation necessitated more hands, forcing the family to partially initiate 2 trusted apprentices into their secrets. One of these men, Daniel Foster, would later become central to the family's undoing. In the autumn of 1785, a Quaker minister named Elijah Thompson was appointed by the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting to investigate concerns about irregular religious practices in outlying communities. Thompson, a methodical man with a background in law before his conversion to the Society of Friends, had earned a reputation for untangling complex church disputes with both diplomacy and unwavering principle. I was tasked with examining the troubling reports of Catholic-like practices involving relics and saint worship that had infiltrated even our plain Quaker meetings, Thompson wrote in his journal, now preserved in the Historical Society of Pennsylvania's sealed collection. Such idolatry runs counter to our belief in direct communion with the divine. Yet several meeting houses had acquired special objects said to enhance spiritual experiences. Thompson's investigation began in Philadelphia, where he noticed a curious pattern. Many of the relics had been acquired through intermediaries who ultimately traced back to Nathaniel Whitmore or his associates. The minister also observed that the provenance of these items, while elaborate in detail, lacked verifiable historical connections. In December 1785, Thompson traveled to Chester County to meet with Nathaniel Whitmore directly. His journal describes their encounter. Whitmore received me graciously in his well-appointed home, offering refreshments and conversation that demonstrated considerable knowledge of theological matters. When I inquired about the religious artifacts his workshop produced, he showed me his public workroom where apprentices crafted beautiful communion ware and decorative items for churches. He spoke at length about his connections with European suppliers of ancient relics, providing documentation that, while impressive to look upon, contained inconsistencies that my legal training could not overlook. Thompson left the meeting troubled but without concrete evidence of wrongdoing. He continued his investigation, interviewing church leaders who had purchased Whitmore relics and cataloguing the miracles attributed to them. A disturbing pattern emerged. The most dramatic miracles often involved witnesses who had some connection, however tenuous, to the Whitmore family or their associates. I began to suspect a deliberate scheme to manufacture not only the relics themselves, but the miracles attributed to them, Thompson wrote. Certain individuals appeared repeatedly in different communities, testifying to wondrous events before moving on. When tracked, their movements formed a web with the Whitmore property at its center. As Thompson's investigation intensified, strange occurrences began to plague him. Items went missing from his lodgings. Correspondence failed to reach its intended recipients. Most disturbingly, evidence he had collected, notes, witness testimonies, and documentation of inconsistencies, disappeared from his locked trunk while he slept at a roadside inn. In February 1786, Thompson returned to Philadelphia to present his findings. The night before his presentation, he attended a dinner at the home of a respected Quaker elder and became violently ill. Physicians diagnosed poisoning, though the source could not be identified. He survived but remained weakened for months, forcing a temporary halt to his investigation. During Thompson's convalescence, a new character entered the narrative, one who would ultimately help expose the true horror of the Whitmore family business. Daniel Foster, the apprentice who had been partially initiated into the family's secrets, began experiencing what he described as unbearable attacks of conscience. After witnessing the processing of a child's body, reportedly that of a 12-year-old orphan girl from a Methodist children's home, Foster fled the Whitmore compound in the middle of the night, taking with him a journal in which he had secretly documented dates, names, and details of the family's activities. Foster made his way to Philadelphia, where, after weeks of gathering courage, he approached the recovering Elijah Thompson with his testimony. The Quaker minister listened in horror to Foster's account. The young man shook violently as he spoke, Thompson recorded. He described a cellar chamber beneath the Whitmore workshop where bodies were suspended from hooks like butchered animals, bodily fluids draining into collection vessels. He spoke of specialized tools for removing bone, muscle, and organs with minimal damage, and of preservation techniques involving salt, alcohol, and herbs that allowed human tissue to maintain a lifelike appearance for months or years. Most disturbing was Foster's description of the family's demeanor during these activities: calm, methodical, even reverent, as if performing sacred rites rather than desecrating human remains. He reported that Nathaniel and Elizabeth Whitmore regularly led prayers before and after these processing sessions, thanking God for choosing these vessels for his divine purpose and asking blessing upon those who would receive the sacred gifts created from the bodies. Armed with Foster's testimony and journal, Thompson prepared to take action. However, before he could present this evidence to authorities, a devastating fire destroyed his Philadelphia residence, claiming all of Foster's documentation. The apprentice himself vanished the following day. His fate remained unknown until partial remains, identified by unique boot buckles, were discovered in the Delaware River 3 weeks later. Undeterred, Thompson continued his investigation with even greater caution. No longer keeping written records and sharing information only with his most trusted associates, he developed an elaborate system of coded messages and multiple informants, slowly rebuilding his case against the Whitmore family. By late 1786, Thompson had connected at least 27 disappearances to the Whitmore operation and identified 9 churches that unknowingly housed human remains disguised as sacred relics. What he still lacked was the physical evidence that would convince skeptical authorities to move against a family that had by then cultivated powerful connections throughout Pennsylvania society. The opportunity to obtain such evidence came from an unexpected source: Sarah Whitmore herself. The winter of 1787 brought unusually heavy snows to Pennsylvania, isolating the Whitmore compound for weeks at a time. During this period of forced seclusion, fractures within the family deepened. Sarah Whitmore, who had maintained her journal in secret for years, began to crumble under the psychological weight of her complicity. Now 32 and unmarried, her father had discouraged suitors who might have taken her away from the family business. She found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. "I can no longer sleep without seeing their faces," she wrote in December 1787. "The children especially haunt me. William has become something inhuman in his enthusiasms. Last week he spoke of experimenting with preservation techniques that would allow for entire limbs to be marketed as intact relics. Mother encouraged him, speaking of the profit potential while quoting scripture about the sanctification of holy vessels. "I cannot bear much more of this." Sarah's crisis of conscience coincided with an escalation in the family's activities. The success of their child relics had emboldened them, particularly William, whose role had expanded as Nathaniel aged. Now 27, William had developed refinements to their preservation techniques that allowed for more convincing relics and consequently higher prices. He pushed for increased production, arguing that the post-revolution spiritual hunger created a market they should fully exploit. This acceleration required more victims, creating greater risks of discovery. William proposed targeting remote frontier settlements where disappearances would attract less attention. Nathaniel, now showing signs of the illness that would eventually claim his life, conceded leadership to his youngest son, despite Thomas's objections that such expansion invited unnecessary danger. In January 1788, two incidents occurred that set in motion the family's eventual exposure. First, William returned from a 2-week journey to western Pennsylvania with 3 new subjects, all children from a remote settlement devastated by winter illness. The processing of these victims in such quick succession overwhelmed even the family's efficient system, forcing them to store partially preserved remains in the workshop cellar for longer than usual. Second, and more significantly, Sarah Whitmore made a fateful decision. During a rare solo trip to Philadelphia to deliver correspondence and collect payments, she sought out Elijah Thompson, whose investigation she had learned about through her family's surveillance of potential threats. Their meeting, held in the back room of a Quaker bookshop, lasted over 3 hours. Thompson's coded notes, deciphered decades later, recorded Sarah's revelations. Female W provided confirmation of all suspicions and worse beyond imagining. Family operation more extensive than previously documented. Estimates 70+ adult victims, 20+ children since beginning. Detailed processing methods and distribution network. Names of participating church officials. See separate encoded list. Most disturbing was her description of an underground chamber beneath main workshop contains remains in various stages of processing plus archived samples of all victims. Small preserved portions kept as quality control references labeled with names and dates. Sarah agreed to help Thompson obtain physical evidence, providing him with a hand-drawn map of the workshop complex, including the hidden entrance to the underground processing chamber. She also revealed the existence of a ledger kept by Elizabeth Whitmore that documented every acquisition and distribution since the business began, a meticulous record of decades of horror that would provide irrefutable evidence if obtained. "I know I condemn myself by revealing these things," Sarah reportedly told Thompson. "I expect no mercy in this world or the next, but the children's faces give me no peace, and I cannot allow more innocence to feed my family's ungodly work." Thompson, recognizing both the value and risk of Sarah's information, arranged for her to stay with trusted Quaker contacts rather than return to the Whitmore compound. This decision, while well-intentioned, accelerated the approaching confrontation. When Sarah failed to return as scheduled, William Whitmore immediately suspected betrayal. According to Thomas Whitmore's later confession, the family held a tense council upon realizing Sarah's defection. William was coldly furious, pacing the study while suggesting increasingly violent courses of action. Father, weakened by his illness, sat slumped in his chair, occasionally muttering prayers or biblical passages about Judas and betrayal. Mother remained calm, methodically listing the vulnerabilities Sarah's absence created and the evidence that needed to be eliminated. I argued for flight, abandoning the workshop and starting anew elsewhere. But William would not hear of surrendering the business he viewed as his birthright. The family decided on a 2-pronged strategy. William would track Sarah to eliminate the immediate threat, while Elizabeth would oversee the relocation of their most incriminating materials to a secondary location, an abandoned mineshaft on the property's western edge that had been converted years earlier for storage. What they could not know was that Thompson had already begun assembling a coalition of authorities to act on Sarah's information. Recognizing that local officials might include Whitmore allies, he approached the Philadelphia yearly meeting's most influential members, who in turn engaged trusted contacts within the newly formed state government. By February 12, 1788, a plan was in place to raid the Whitmore compound and gather evidence of their crimes. The night before the planned raid, a snowstorm descended upon Chester County, hampering travel and communications. Thompson, fearing delay would give the Whitmores time to destroy evidence, made the fateful decision to proceed with a smaller force rather than wait for better conditions. He departed Philadelphia with 6 armed men, including 2 constables and 4 Quaker volunteers committed to ending the Whitmore atrocities. What followed was described by multiple sources as the night of unholy discovery, an encounter with human depravity that would haunt all involved for the remainder of their lives. February 13, 1788, arrived with howling winds driving snow horizontally across the Pennsylvania countryside. Elijah Thompson and his small party reached the outskirts of the Whitmore property shortly after nightfall, their lanterns struggling against the darkness and swirling snow. They approached on foot, following Sarah's map toward the workshop rather than the main house. "We moved like ghosts through the storm," wrote James Pearson, one of the Quaker volunteers, in an account sealed alongside Thompson's records. "The wind masked our approach, but also prevented us from hearing activity within the buildings. The workshop windows glowed with lantern light despite the late hour, an ominous sign that our arrival might not be unexpected. The men positioned themselves around the structure, with Thompson and the 2 constables approaching the main door while others covered potential escape routes. Their plan was to secure any occupants quickly, then locate the hidden entrance to the underground chambers Sarah had described. Thompson knocked firmly, announcing official business. After a moment of silence, the door opened to reveal Thomas Whitmore, his tall frame silhouetted against the workshop's interior light. "He showed no surprise at our presence," Pearson recorded. "His eyes moved over our small party as if counting. Then he stepped aside with an unsettling calm, inviting us to enter if we must. I sensed immediately that something was terribly wrong. His manner suggested not the panic of discovery, but the composed resignation of a man who had prepared for this moment." Inside, the workshop's main floor appeared as any craftsman's space, tools hanging in precise order, partially completed religious items arranged on workbenches, the scent of wood shavings and varnish hanging in the air. Thomas stood with hands clasped before him, responding to Thompson's direct questions with monosyllabic answers, while his eyes continually drifted toward a large cabinet against the far wall. Following this gaze, Constable William Bradford moved toward the cabinet, finding it unlocked. Inside, rather than tools or supplies, he discovered a black velvet pouch containing what appeared to be a preserved human finger. Upon this discovery, Thomas Whitmore's demeanor changed, Bradford later testified. He sank to his knees, muttering what sounded like prayers or confessions. When questioned about other family members, he revealed that his father lay ill in the main house while his mother and brother William had departed hours earlier with several large trunks, heading west toward the property's edge. Thompson immediately dispatched 2 men to intercept Elizabeth and William while he and the remaining party pressed Thomas to reveal the entrance to the underground chamber. After initial resistance, Thomas led them to a workbench that, when slid aside, exposed a trap door set into the workshop floor. "The smell that rose from that opening struck us like a physical blow," Pearson wrote. "A miasma of chemical preservatives mixed with the unmistakable stench of human decay. Thomas lit a lantern and led us down narrow wooden stairs into darkness that seemed to swallow the light. What we found below exceeds my ability to describe without compromising my soul's peace. Yet the truth must be recorded, no matter how abhorrent. The underground chamber extended beneath both the workshop and beyond a series of rooms carved from the earth and reinforced with timber supports. The first space contained workbenches similar to those above, but the implements laid upon them were clearly designed for surgical precision rather than woodworking. Glass containers of various sizes held liquids whose purposes the men dared not contemplate. A large drain in the center of the stone floor led to a system of channels that disappeared into the walls. Everything was meticulously organized, Bradford reported. Notebooks containing detailed procedures sat beside surgical instruments arranged by size and purpose. One volume, opened to a recently used page, contained drawings of human anatomy with specific sections highlighted and annotated with preservation instructions. The adjacent room revealed the true horror of the Whitmore operation. Here, 3 bodies in various stages of processing hung suspended from iron hooks set into the ceiling beams, 2 adults and 1 child estimated to be 9 or 10 years old. Each had been partially dissected with surgical precision, their remains treated with preservatives that gave the exposed tissue an unnatural, waxy appearance. Most disturbing was the third chamber, which Thomas referred to in a hollow voice as the archive. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined all four walls, holding hundreds of small wooden boxes, each meticulously labeled with names, dates, and locations. Random inspection revealed that each box contained a preserved human fragment, a piece of bone, a section of skin, a small organ or tissue sample, kept as a reference catalogue of all the saints the Whitmores had created and distributed. At the center of this room stood a large wooden table bearing Elizabeth Whitmore's ledger, the business record Sarah had described. Thompson wrote, "This massive volume documented in cold commercial terms the acquisition of victims, the processing of their remains, and the distribution of resulting relics to churches throughout the eastern seaboard. Each entry included the price paid, the church receiving the items, and notes on the fabricated provenance provided to the purchasers." Thomas Whitmore, now seemingly resigned to his fate, revealed that the operation had processed 79 adults and 22 children since its inception in 1745. The family had supplied relics to over 40 churches across 7 states, generating wealth that had been carefully laundered through legitimate businesses and land holdings. When asked how they selected their victims, Thomas's response chilled the investigators to their core. Mother had the discernment. She could sense those whose bodies would produce the most powerful relics, the truly devout, the innocents, those whose suffering purified them for sacred purpose. She taught William to see it, too. They would watch at church gatherings, at revival meetings, identifying those whose flesh might bring miracles. The investigation of the underground chambers continued for hours, with the men documenting their findings as thoroughly as their shaken state allowed. As dawn approached, a commotion from above drew them back to the workshop level, where they found the 2 men who had been sent to intercept Elizabeth and William Whitmore. One was seriously injured, bleeding from a deep knife wound to his shoulder. William Whitmore fought like one possessed, the wounded man reported. "We found them at the abandoned mineshaft," as Thomas had indicated, transferring boxes from a wagon into the entrance. When confronted, Elizabeth attempted to reason with us, offering money for our silence, while William circled behind. He struck without warning, a butcher's precision to his violence. "My companion is dead, his throat cut before I could intervene." The Whitmores fled into the forest with what they could carry. A broader manhunt was organized as daylight broke, with messengers sent to alert authorities in neighboring counties. Nathaniel Whitmore was found in the main house, too weakened by illness to have participated in the recent activities. He offered no resistance when taken into custody, alternating between religious justifications for his family's work and apparent confusion about his surroundings. The search for Elizabeth and William Whitmore continued for 3 days before reaching its gruesome conclusion. Their bodies were discovered in a small hunting cabin 12 miles from the family property, arranged side by side on a crude altar constructed from local materials. Both had consumed poison after apparently performing some form of ritual whose exact nature remains unclear. Notes found at the scene suggested they believed their deaths would consecrate the remaining relics they had managed to salvage during their escape. Thomas Whitmore was tried in Philadelphia in April 1788, the proceedings conducted with unusual secrecy due to the sensational and disturbing nature of the crimes. He was hanged on May 7, 1788, after providing a complete confession that corroborated the physical evidence found at the family compound. The most challenging question facing authorities was how to handle the hundreds of human remains that had been distributed as relics to unsuspecting churches. The decision, reached after lengthy deliberation involving both government and religious leaders, prioritized preventing public panic and religious disillusionment over full disclosure. The aftermath of the Whitmore family's horrific enterprise presented unprecedented challenges for both civil and religious authorities in the young United States. The full truth threatened to undermine public faith in religious institutions at a time when such faith was considered essential to the moral foundation of the new nation. After consultation with leaders from various denominations, a decision was reached that would shape how this dark chapter would be remembered, or rather, deliberately forgotten. "We determined that the faithful should be protected from knowledge that might devastate their spiritual foundations," wrote Judge William Bradford in a sealed memorandum to the Pennsylvania governor. The churches that unknowingly participated in this abomination need not bear the burden of public shame or lose the confidence of their congregations. Therefore, all records of this investigation shall be sealed for a period not less than 100 years, and officials involved are bound to silence by oath. The churches that had purchased Whitmore relics were privately informed of their true nature. Each institution was given the option of having the human remains quietly collected for proper Christian burial in unmarked graves or allowing the church leaders to handle the matter themselves with absolute discretion. According to Thompson's final report, most chose the latter option, unwilling to involve even the discreet government representatives in what was viewed as a profound desecration of their sacred spaces. What the authorities could not have anticipated was how many church leaders decided upon a third option, one that speaks to the darkest aspects of human psychology and religious conviction. Of the 43 churches identified in Elizabeth Whitmore's ledger, historical records suggest that at least 17 chose to retain the human remains, continuing to present them as authentic relics while knowing their true origins. The justification offered by these clergy was disturbing in its pragmatism, Thompson noted in his final entry before the records were sealed. Several expressed the view that since the miracles associated with these remains had occurred regardless of their provenance, perhaps God had indeed sanctified these poor victims through their unwilling sacrifice. Others spoke more practically of the donations, increased attendance, and enhanced prestige their churches had gained through possession of these powerful relics. To surrender these advantages, they argued, would harm their congregations more than continuing the deception. Thompson, a man of unwavering moral principle, found this reasoning abhorrent. His final efforts focused on creating a confidential registry of every Whitmore victim whose identity could be established, along with the location of their remains, if known. This document, intended to ensure that these individuals would not be completely erased from history, was included in the sealed records with instructions that it be used to provide proper memorialization when the truth could finally be acknowledged. The Whitmore property was burned to the ground in what was officially recorded as an accidental fire, though multiple accounts suggest it was deliberately set by local authorities to eliminate any remaining evidence of the horrors that had occurred there. The land was reclaimed by the state and eventually divided and sold to families who knew nothing of its history. Sarah Whitmore, whose courage had helped expose her family's crimes, was provided with a new identity and relocated to Boston, where she lived under Quaker protection until her death in 1823. Her journal, maintained until her final days, reveals a woman haunted by guilt, yet determined to honor the victims through a life dedicated to charitable works, particularly those benefiting orphan children. "I cannot undo what my family wrought," she wrote in her final entry. "But each child I helped to safety and education stands against the darkness we created. I have lived 40 years attempting to balance scales that can never be truly balanced. I go to my judgment with no expectation of mercy, only the hope that those we harmed have found the peace we stole from them." The physical evidence of the Whitmore family's crimes, the surgical tools, preservation formulas, and workshop apparatus was supposedly destroyed after the trial. However, rumors persisted for decades that certain items had been quietly preserved by medical schools or private collectors fascinated by the technical innovations the family had developed for tissue preservation. Of particular interest to early medical researchers were the Whitmore's techniques for maintaining the lifelike appearance and flexibility of preserved human tissue, methods that William Whitmore had apparently developed through years of gruesome experimentation. Several early 19th century medical texts contain oblique references to preservation processes that bear striking similarities to those described in the Whitmore case records, though never with direct attribution to their true source. The story of the Whitmore family might have remained completely buried were it not for a courthouse fire in Philadelphia in 1879. As water-damaged documents were removed for restoration, several sealed packets from the 1788 case were mistakenly included with regular court records being processed. A clerk discovered portions of Thomas Whitmore's confession and alerted his superiors, who quickly resealed the documents. However, rumors of their content circulated, eventually reaching a reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer. The resulting investigation produced a sensationalized account that, while containing numerous inaccuracies, brought the basic outline of the Whitmore crimes into public knowledge for the first time. The article, published on November 17, 1879, exactly 134 years after Mary Collins became the family's first victim, created a brief sensation before being denounced by religious leaders as lurid fiction and anti-religious slander. Without access to the sealed records, the reporter could not substantiate his claims, and the story was eventually retracted under pressure. By this time, most of the churches that had knowingly retained Whitmore relics had either disposed of them as older clergy died and were replaced, or had incorporated them so completely into church tradition that their origins were forgotten even by the institutions themselves. The physical evidence of the family's crimes had been scattered to unmarked graves, private collections, and church reliquaries where they remained, their true nature known only to a dwindling few. In 1923, during renovations to the Pennsylvania Historical Society building, workers discovered a hidden compartment behind a bookshelf containing the complete sealed records of the Whitmore case, apparently placed there by Elijah Thompson himself as insurance against the official records being destroyed. The Society's director, recognizing the historical significance of the documents, made the controversial decision to preserve them while maintaining their confidentiality. They were catalogued under an innocuous title and restricted to qualified researchers who obtained special permission. It was through this carefully controlled access that historians began to piece together the true scope of the Whitmore family's operation and its lasting impact on American religious practice. The most disturbing aspect of these later investigations was the confirmation that human remains processed by the Whitmores continued to exist in church collections well into the 20th century, with some possibly remaining to the present day. A survey conducted discreetly in 1967 identified 11 churches across the eastern United States that still possessed objects matching descriptions in the Whitmore ledger. Though most current church leaders were unaware of their origins, when approached with evidence of their true nature, reactions ranged from horrified cooperation to outright denial and refusal to investigate further. The Harmony Meeting House, where the Whitmores once worshipped, still stands, though the congregation disbanded in the early 1800s. The simple stone building was repurposed as a community gathering place, then a schoolhouse, before being abandoned in the 1930s. Local residents report an unusual reluctance to approach the building after dark, with many claiming to experience a profound sense of unease when passing the property. Whether this represents the power of suggestion from local legends or something more difficult to explain remains a matter of perspective. Perhaps the most disturbing legacy of the Whitmore family lies not in the physical remains of their victims, but in the psychological impact of their deception. The notion that objects of devotion, handled with reverence and believed to channel divine power, could actually be the products of serial murder creates a profound cognitive dissonance for those confronting this history. It raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of faith, the power of belief, and the human capacity for self-deception in service of desired outcomes. If you've been captivated by this dark chapter of American religious history, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Our community of true mystery seekers grows stronger with each new member, and your support allows us to continue uncovering these hidden historical horrors. What other secrets might be hiding in your local church's history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Whitmore case also forces us to confront the troubling reality that miracles attributed to these fraudulent relics were reported by seemingly reliable witnesses. Contemporary accounts describe healings, visions, and other phenomena experienced by individuals with no connection to the Whitmore conspiracy and no apparent motive to fabricate such claims. Were these merely the power of suggestion and coincidence? Or does sincere belief create its own reality, regardless of the physical object's true nature? The philosophical implications extend far beyond this single historical case. In 1992, ground-penetrating radar was used to survey the former Whitmore property, revealing anomalies consistent with underground chambers and what appeared to be a filled-in mineshaft. Limited archaeological investigation confirmed the existence of structures matching descriptions in the historical record. Though no human remains were recovered, the current landowners, disturbed by these findings, declined to permit further excavation, and the site was reburied and marked as historically significant but not open to the public. The last verified Whitmore relic was removed from a small Lutheran church in western Pennsylvania in 2005, when renovation work exposed a hidden compartment behind the altar containing a small velvet pouch and a letter from 1788. The church pastor, upon learning the likely origin of the object, arranged for DNA testing that confirmed it was human tissue. The remains were given a proper burial in the church cemetery with a simple marker reading, "Unknown child of God, finally at rest." As for the Whitmore family home, the property changed hands multiple times after the state's confiscation and eventual sale. The area where the workshop once stood remained undeveloped, as successive owners reported that crops planted there failed to thrive and livestock refused to graze on that particular section of land. Local legend holds that on certain autumn nights, particularly around November 17th, the outline of the workshop can be seen glowing faintly in the darkness, though no physical structure has stood there for over 2 centuries. If this dark tale of religious exploitation and murder has sent chills down your spine, share it with someone who appreciates historical horror. Hit the like button to support our ongoing exploration of America's hidden terrors, and subscribe to never miss our future investigations into the shadows of our nation's past. What sinister secrets might be hiding in your community's history? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The most enduring legacy of the Whitmore case may be the questions it raises about how we construct and maintain historical narratives. The deliberate suppression of this story by both governmental and religious authorities demonstrates how uncomfortable truths can be systematically erased from public memory when they threaten established institutions or cherished beliefs. It stands as a reminder that what we know as history often represents not the complete truth of the past, but rather the version of events that powerful interests have allowed to survive. For the victims of the Whitmore family, the devout men and women whose bodies were violated after death, and especially the innocent children whose lives were cut short to feed this macabre enterprise, perhaps the greatest injustice is not just their murder, but the erasure of their stories. They died twice, first at the hands of their killers, and then again when their identities were deliberately obscured to protect institutional reputations. As we conclude this dark chapter of American religious history, we should remember that somewhere in eastern Pennsylvania, unmarked graves hold the partial remains of those who unwillingly became saints through the Whitmores' terrible enterprise. Other fragments of these same individuals may still rest in church reliquaries, venerated by the faithful who remain unaware of their true origins. This physical separation serves as a powerful metaphor for how history itself becomes fragmented, pieces preserved here, portions hidden there, the complete truth never fully assembled. The next time you enter an old church and see a relic on display, perhaps you'll wonder about its true provenance. In that moment of questioning, you pay tribute to those whose stories were nearly lost to history's deliberate forgetting. For in remembering the Whitmore family's victims, we assert that no institutional reputation is more valuable than the truth, no matter how disturbing that truth may be. This mystery shows us the darkest aspects of human nature disguised as spiritual devotion. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or are there church relics still hiding dark secrets? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries.